All right, welcome back to our next lesson. So in our last lesson we were talking about the Mycenaeans, but mostly from a mythological point of view. And that's where it seems to lead to mostly. Talked about the Trojan War, but again, with both the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, we know about both of them from basically the two methods of the two things: archaeology and then the mythological stories, and then trying to pull the fact from the fiction. So that's why I feel like it's good to tell the mythological stories, at least give some background on it, because we do pull a lot from that and understanding ancient Greek culture and kind of what was important to them, most like what they had, and then just trying to glean what information we can, make whatever guesses we can about those civilizations. Now, we left off talking about, most likely what happened. Who is Helen symbolized as? Maybe it was a trade thing. Troy was definitely positioned on an area that was definitely controlled trade in the Aegean and Black Seas. We also talked about the Mycenaeans being a very rivalistic type of culture, very independent. Something that, of course, as Americans, we love that sense of independence. And again, one of the reasons why we talk about the Greeks so much. But in this lesson, we're going to be going into just how the Mycenaeans fall and the beginning of the Dark Age, the Greek Dark Age, and we'll talk a little bit about what Dark Ages are. I spend a little bit more time on this when we get into our medieval unit, but it is worth talking about at this point because there's not just one Dark Age. We're usually, especially in Western Civ, we think of like the Dark Age just being there's only one. There's actually quite a few Dark Ages. You can easily argue that there's many areas of the world today that you could say are in a Dark Age compared to where they were. So, with that being said, okay. First off, the Mycenaeans, they're doing their thing, but around 1100 BC, they suffered the hands of a lot of invaders. Now, this is actually part of a larger, it's being characterized as like the fall of the Bronze Age. It's not just the Mycenaeans that are getting invaded. The Hittite Empire next to them are getting invaded. The Egyptians are getting invaded. The Mesopotamians are getting invaded, and from all ends. Like you're getting it from basically the steppes of Indo-Europe. You're having invaders coming on the seas, and we talked about the sea peoples back with ancient Egypt. You're getting these invaders coming in from somewhere north. They just come. And they just start tearing down all the civilization, these thousands of years of civilization that have built up to this point, just kind of come crashing down all in one fell swoop with all of these invaders coming in. Just, the societies of the time just could not handle it. And the Mycenaeans are no different. They get swept over as well. Now, the interesting thing here is just how this Dark Age starts. It's like I'm talking about these invaders, making it sound like the invaders are the ones that are the reason why the Dark Age starts. And that's, again, from what I can tell and what I've read and what I've studied and heard and listened to and all this stuff in this area, it's kind of up in the air. Like invaders coming in, that seems like a good indicator and saying, okay, a Dark Age is about to start. You just wiped everybody out. These barbarians are kind of uncouth, they're uncivilized, and therefore downfall of civilization. But there's a heck of a lot of evidence that a lot of these invaders, especially a group of people called the Dorians, kind of like the bigger black line of people coming in that settled through the Peloponnesian Peninsula and down in the southern islands of the Aegean Sea, including Crete, that they actually settle in and kind of start assimilating into Mycenaean culture. They start establishing polises, cities. And even though, they kind of romp through the territory as well as a lot of other invaders, but they set up, they set things up. This next part is just the part that just does not make sense to me. Like I'm about to teach this, and at the same time, it just doesn't make sense to me. And that is, they just leave. When I say leave, by the way, this is the reason for one of the Belvert questions I had at the beginning of class, or you've taken on Canvas, the idea of what would make you leave the comforts of your home and just go live in the wilderness. That's a tough question. Most people it would have to be something pretty dang severe to get me to leave my home. It can be a fun discussion in class, depending. But that's what happens here. Apparently, they just all up and decide, meh, civilized life, living in a city, living in kind of some sort of organized society just isn't for me any longer. And they just leave. Here's basically a picture of one of these. I think that's Mycenae itself. I hope I got that. That's what I was looking up when I was looking for pictures of things, and I hope I got that right. Haven't been there myself. But it's also just the idea of like, hey, it looks like a good ancient abandoned town there. But yeah, they just up and leave. And they just go off into the wilderness. It's not, so this isn't one of those like, it's not like the Minoans where they're there and then they just go bye-bye, like we talked about, that potential explosion, volcanic explosion on the island of Thera. But this is where the people are there. It's not like they all get killed off by the barbarians or they kill each other in massive civil war. No, they just somehow as a people, all these different city-states, all these different polises just decide it's not worth it. Like in my mind, I'm thinking it was like there's some curse that everybody really believes in, that where the gods are cursing all cities and something like that, and it makes you even afraid to come back to them. I mean, that's how far of a stretch my mind goes in just thinking of like, okay, and theorizing and hypothesizing what would have caused this. Like I have a tough time with this. Like I'm teaching it right now and I have a tough time with this. I think there's some discrepancies here and I would really like to figure out what really happened. Anyways, sorry. So the thing is that it does happen. It does. We have like basically this gap in time of Greek history where we have all this we have all these writings like linear A, linear B. Don't necessarily know how to translate it all just yet. Organized societies, and then you don't. For like 300 years you don't. And this is what's called the Greek Dark Age. So in this Dark Age, the main reason we call it a Dark Age is because it's dark to us. Meaning that we just don't know anything about it, or, well, not much about it, I should say, because all of a sudden we go from a time period where things seem to be organized and you have written records, even when we can't read them, to a time period where they just decide, well, not only do they decide to leave the cities, they also decide writing's for chumps, record keeping's for chumps. I imagine a lot of students hearing this are like, well, I think so too, I don't want to do my homework. But they just don't have anything at all, and they turn to what are called oral traditions. This is where you pass stories down by word of mouth, like grandfather sitting around the fire with his grandsons, and then telling these stories to continue on some sort of traditions and morals. And this is where we believe that the stories that turn into the Greek mythological stories, the ones I've gone through and told you a few of now, and that this is where they go from what they originally meant to be, kind of like their original stories, into more of the mythological tall tales that we have today, or the ancient Greeks that come out of this have afterwards. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's, how do I put this? That's kind of the Dark Age in a nutshell. This is that type of Dark Age. Where we call it a Dark Age because we just don't know much about it. Maybe there's stuff we haven't discovered yet. Maybe there's some understanding we can gain where it doesn't seem like a Dark Age anymore. But we call this the Greek Dark Age mainly because it seems like a Dark Age to us. The medieval Dark Age, by the way, when we call that the Dark Age, basically from the fall of Rome to the beginning of the Renaissance, basically like roughly 500 AD to about 1500 AD. I could change those years. It could be like 400 AD to like 1400 AD or 1315 AD. Anyways, give or take, basically a 1,000-year time period in medieval history, and I'm outside of Greek history, by the way. A little bit of a tangent. But that Dark Age is symbolized by this idea of just an overall idea of society going backwards. It doesn't mean there weren't very smart people in medieval times Europe, but overall you just have a much larger lack of understanding, education, overall, versus the way things used to be and then the way things were afterwards. And so that's why I call that Dark Age. We know everything about it. There's tons of records. We know tons of things, and we can definitely see they took a step back. Hence, they're in a Dark Age and not as good as they once were. We call this a Dark Age because we don't know much about it. It's dark to us. So it's kind of like the two different ideas when we use the term Dark Age in history. Either we don't know much about the time, and maybe they didn't either, and maybe it really was a Dark Age, like according to the second idea of a Dark Age, where it's just like, yeah, they took a step back in civilization. So, hopefully I explained that all right. I will be hitting the concept of Dark Age more as we move on, especially when we get into our medieval unit. So, but that's not the only thing that characterizes the Dark Age. Again, one more time, like I said, just there seems to be no dominant civilization. Because they leave their cities, it seems like the idea of organized societies just goes kaput. So, now what causes this? Again, just no clue. I know I keep saying that, but that's what I'm trying to embed in your heads right now. We just don't know. So this is the Greek Dark Age. And I'm going to end this lesson at this point, and in the next lesson we'll talk about coming out of the Dark Age and getting into actually what we know as ancient Greek times. Everything up to this point has been the early Greeks. Starting with the next lesson, we're going to be getting into what we know as the ancient Greek times, the stuff we really know about and have a lot of records on.